Imagine standing in the middle of a vast silent plain, where an entire people once lived, fought, loved, and died. But you can't find a single bone. No graves, no skeletons, no teeth tucked in the dirt. Just wind, grass, and a feeling that something here went very, very wrong. For centuries, traders swore there was a tribe out on the highlands they called the Magnetic Plains. A place where compasses spun uselessly and storms rolled in without warning. Caravans claimed they saw smoke from distant fires, strange patterns burned into the earth, and silhouettes moving along the horizon like ghosts. And then, one day, nothing. The fires went out. The songs stopped. The traders' routes went quiet. When explorers finally pushed into that forgotten region, they expected battlefields, mass graves, or at least a few scattered remains. Instead, they found abandoned camps, broken tools, half-buried fire pits, and absolutely no sign that human bodies had ever existed there at all. No bones in the soil, no charred fragments in old ashes, not even the tiniest shard of a tooth in the dust. If a tribe really lived here, the land had swallowed them whole. The people of the Magnetic Plains didn't just vanish. They erased their own bodies from history. And the strangest part? Modern science might actually have an explanation for how a tribe could disappear so completely that even their skeletons seemed to dissolve into air. Stay with this story, because the deeper you go into the Magnetic Plains, the more it starts to feel less like archaeology, and more like a warning. Picture this: late 19th century survey teams pushing into a stretch of land everyone else avoided. They called it the Magnetic Plains because the moment you crossed an invisible line, your tools stopped behaving like they should. Compasses spun. Metal needles twitched. Old pocket watches began to lose time. Local guides refused to go far in. They spoke about a tribe who used to live there. People who walked barefoot on stones that crackled with hidden storms, who knew how to read the sky like a map. They never built stone monuments. They didn't carve their stories into rock. Their legacy lived in songs carried by traders and whispers traded at campfires. But those stories always ended the same way. One year, the songs stopped. When the first scientific expeditions finally made it onto the plains, they weren't looking for myths. They were looking for data. They found unusual magnetic readings, strange soil deposits rich in iron, and evidence of intense electrical storms that struck the same patches of ground over and over. And then they found something even stranger: signs of long-term human settlement, circular arrangements of stones where dwellings once stood, fire pits layered with ash from decades of use, shards of pottery, broken tools shaped from something that looked like bone, curved, sharpened, polished smooth by years of handling. But when they tested the ground, nothing. No collagen traces, no calcium residues, no microscopic bone fragments mixed into the soil. It was as if a whole community had lived here for generations without ever leaving a body behind. No graves, no scattered ribs from hunting accidents, no lost teeth, no children's tiny bones, nothing. A human life always ends in a body. So how do you find the story of a people who left no trace of theirs? The more evidence the teams uncovered, the more one question grew louder. Where are the dead? In any human settlement, death leaves a pattern. You find burial grounds at the edges of camp or hidden in groves. You find cremation pits, charred bone fragments, urns storing ashes. Even when people try to hide their dead, the earth quietly keeps the receipts. Traces of calcium, phosphorus, tiny fragments of enamel that last longer than flesh, longer than memory. On the Magnetic Plains, that pattern was missing. The tribe's presence was obvious in everything except their bodies. There were children's toys carved from wood, worn flat where small hands had held them. There were cooking stones blackened by years of use. There were shards of painted pottery depicting storms and strange symbols that looked suspiciously like spirals of lightning. But no one could find the places where they grieved. Some scientists came up with simple explanations. Maybe the bodies had been taken elsewhere. Maybe the tribe carried their dead back to some sacred canyon or hidden mountain, far away from these storm-racked fields. But the stories from the traders didn't match that. They spoke of smoke rising from the plains themselves, of chanting that went on for hours, of flickering lights on high ridges that looked like ritual fires. Nobody talked about long funeral journeys. They talked about the ground itself being sacred and angry. Then there were the storms. The Magnetic Plains were known for something called repeat strikes. Lightning finding the same patch of earth again and again, as if drawn back to it by invisible wires. Any bones buried there would have been hit by countless bolts over decades, maybe centuries. Under the right conditions, that much electricity doesn't just burn. It fuses. It vaporizes. What if the tribe didn't leave bones because the sky took them back, piece by piece? And what if they knew that was going to happen? As more teams dug, a different pattern began to emerge. One that had less to do with superstition and more to do with chemistry. The soil of the magnetic plains wasn't normal. It was unusually acidic in some layers, rich in iron in others, and littered with tiny glassy fragments formed by intense heat. In some spots, the ground was laced with fine, blackened channels where lightning had raced through the sand, melting it into delicate, branching structures before cooling. A kind of natural scar tissue called fulgurite. Imagine burying a body there. First, the soil would strip away soft tissue faster than usual, like an invisible fire that never stops. Then, storms would slam the same ground over and over, pumping electricity into the earth. Over years, decades, centuries, that combination could grind bone down, cracking it, heating it, exposing it to water that dissolved away what was left. Under the right conditions, even a skeleton can be erased. But there was another clue. The broken bone tools everyone assumed were carved from animal remains? Under a microscope, they looked a little too perfect. The structure wasn't porous enough. The color was slightly off. They were more brittle than old bone should be. Some of them weren't bone at all. They were mineral. It's as if the tribe had tried to copy bones out of the very material that was eating their dead. Tools shaped like femurs and ribs and vertebrae, but made from the stone and glass of the plains themselves. Maybe they weren't just hunters and herders. Maybe they were observers. People who watched their dead vanish into the earth and sky and decided to work with that process instead of fighting it. There are signs they burned their dead in open pyres positioned where storms were most frequent, almost as if they were feeding bodies into the sky, accelerating the erasure. No graves, no tombs, no monuments. A culture built around the idea that the cleanest burial was to leave nothing behind. So what do you call a people who choose to vanish like that? To the traders who watched from a distance, they were mysterious, maybe even cursed. To early scientists, they were a puzzle without enough pieces. But when you look at the magnetic plains with everything we understand now, about soil chemistry, about lightning, about how fragile even bone can be, it starts to look less like a haunting and more like a deliberate design. Think about it. Most cultures build their legacy in stone. Pyramids, temples, carved monoliths that scream, "We were here." They cling to the idea that to be remembered, you must leave something behind. Bones in the ground, names on a plaque, dates etched into rock. The people of the magnetic plains seem to have gone in the opposite direction. They lived in a place that erases. A place where storms rewrite the soil and the earth itself eats bone. And instead of fleeing that landscape, they folded it into their belief system. They built tools that mimic bones out of stone and glass. They burned their dead beneath angry skies, letting storms complete the work. They accepted a brutal idea. The cleanest way to be part of the world is not to mark it. We don't know their language. We don't know their songs. We only know the negative space they left behind. The camp circles, the storm scars, the tools made of the same minerals that wiped their bodies away. And that's the unnerving twist. Right now, we measure our impact by what we leave. Plastic, concrete, carbon, towers scraping the clouds. We assume the future will read our bones in landfills and our fingerprints in ruined forests. But somewhere, long before we built our skyscrapers and our satellites, there was a tribe who made a different choice. To live intensely, and then let the earth close over them like they were never there. So here's the question. In a world obsessed with leaving a mark, do you find that terrifying or strangely peaceful? If you want more dark stories where H